Hey guys, tonight we are diving head first or maybe nose first into the grimy, gritty, and frankly, quite disgusting world of 19th century London. We're going to explore what junk food really meant during the Industrial Revolution. And let me tell you, it makes today's fast food look like a Michelin-starred health retreat. You're about to become a Londoner in the 1850 seconds, and fair warning, your survivor odds are not great. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below and let me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's not a sound that wakes you, but a feeling. A deep, rattling cough that seems to shake the whole room, which isn't hard because the room is barely a room at all. It's more of a sliver of space carved out of a larger, decaying building. You peel your eyes open, but it doesn't help much. The darkness is thick, heavy, and has a texture. It's the kind of dark that feels like a damp, woolen blanket has been thrown over the world. Slowly, the sounds begin to register. The distant, mournful shriek of a factory whistle cuts through the air, the city's cruel alarm clock. It's followed by the low rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on cobblestones, the clatter of horses' hooves, and the faint, rhythmic shouts of early morning sellers already hawking their wares. These are the sounds of London waking up, a giant, groaning beast stirring from a restless sleep. You push yourself up on one elbow. The mattress beneath you is a lumpy sack filled with straw and who knows what else. It rustles, a dry, scratchy sound. The air you breathe in is cold and wet, and it tastes of coal smoke and damp earth. This is the famous London pea soup fog you've heard so much about, a thick, yellow-brown smoke born from the marriage of river fog and the endless plumes of smoke from tens of thousands of coal fires. It seeps in through the cracks in the window frame, under the door, even through the walls themselves. It coats every surface with a fine layer of grime, and you can feel it in the back of your throat. Your gaze drifts to the single window. It's small, streaked with filth, and offers no view, only a swirling grey void. You might wonder why a room in a city, so starved for light, would have so few windows. Well, for a long time, the government taxed houses based on the number of windows they had. It was a strange, unpopular tax on light and air, and the result is that landlords bricked up windows to save money, plunging places like this into a permanent twilight. It's a chillingly practical piece of history that you are now living in. The darkness isn't just natural, it's legislated. You share this space, perhaps with your family, all huddled together for warmth, their sleeping breaths a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the city's noise. Or perhaps you're a lodger, and the other sleeping forms in the room are strangers, all of you bound together by the simple, desperate need for a roof over your heads. Privacy is a luxury you can't afford. Just like clean air and quiet, your body aches. It's a dull, persistent ache in your bones and muscles, the kind that comes not from a single injury, but from the slow grind of relentless labor, poor nutrition, and sleeping on a hard surface in a damp room. This physical discomfort is the baseline of your existence. Historians still debate the full psychological toll this constant sensory assault, the noise, the filth, the darkness had on the average Londoner. Was it a source of constant, low-level trauma, or did people simply become numb to it, developing a hardened resilience as a matter of pure survival? As you sit there in the cold and the gloom, one sensation begins to cut through all the others. A hollow, cramping feeling in the pit of your stomach. Hunger. It's a familiar friend, or perhaps a more accurate description would be a familiar tyrant. It's the driving force of your day, every day. The factory whistle wasn't just a signal to the city, it was a signal to you. It means you need to get up, get out, and earn the few pennies that will hopefully be enough to silence this gnawing in your belly, at least for a little while. The first order of business, before the long day of work even begins, is to find something, anything to eat. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, your bare feet meeting the cold, gritty floorboards. The day has begun, and your first challenge is already clear. What can you possibly afford for breakfast? You wrap a thin, threadbare shawl around your shoulders and step out of the tenement building, plunging directly into the current of the street. The air hits you with the force of a physical blow, a chaotic cocktail of smells. There's the ever-present coal smoke, of course, but layered beneath it is the sharp tang of horse manure, the stench of unwashed bodies, the sour smell of spilled beer from the pub on the corner, and a faint, sweetish odor of decay rising from the gutters. This is the perfume of poverty. Your destination is the street corner, where a few makeshift stalls are already set up, catering to the morning rush of workers like yourself. Your entire fortune for the day jingles in a small pocket sewn into your trousers. It's not much. A few pennies, maybe a sixpence if you were lucky with yesterday's wages. You clutch them tightly through the thin fabric. The small metal discs a cold, hard reminder of your precarious place in the world. Your mind races, calculating. Every purchase is a complex equation of cost, energy, and risk. You could buy a cup of what the vendor calls coffee, but you know it's mostly just burnt grain and chicory, a bitter, dark liquid that offers caffeine-free disappointment. There might be a stall selling oysters, which sounds like a luxury today, but back then, they were one of the cheapest, most plentiful foods available to the poor. A strange little historical footnote: oysters were the fast food of the Victorian working class. They were scooped from heavily polluted riverbeds and sold for a penny a dozen, often eaten raw on the spot. But even at a penny, they're a gamble. A bad oyster could mean days of sickness, and you can't afford to miss a single shift at the factory. The real prize, the staple food that underpins your entire existence, is bread. It's the foundation of every meal. A thick slice of bread is what you'll have for breakfast now, what you'll carry in your pocket for lunch, and what you'll dip into a thin broth for dinner, if you're lucky. It needs to be cheap, and it needs to be filling. You approach a baker's cart. The loaves are stacked high, some darker and coarser, others are brilliant, alluring white. And this is where your economic reality slams into you. You look at the prices chalked onto a small, grimy slate. The dark, whole-grain loaves, the kind we'd now call artisan and pay a premium for, are cheaper. They're dense, heavy, and considered the food of the truly desperate. The beautiful, fluffy, white loaves are more expensive. They are a status symbol. In this era, whiteness in bread was equated with purity, quality, and prosperity. It suggested the flour had been finely milled and was free from the dirt and bran that colored the cheaper loaves. For someone like you, whose life is defined by grime and hard labor, buying a white loaf feels like a small act of rebellion. A tiny taste of a better life. It's an affordable luxury. A way to tell yourself that you're not at the very bottom of the social ladder. Historians often point to this phenomenon as a key example of how cultural values can shape economic choices, even against the logic of pure nutrition. People weren't just buying calories, they were buying dignity. So you ignore the sensible, nutritious dark loaf. Your eyes are fixed on the white one. It costs a precious penny more, but the psychological comfort it offers feels worth it. You untie the knot in your pocket and carefully count out the coins, your cold fingers fumbling slightly. You hand them to the baker, a man whose face is perpetually dusted with a fine layer of flour, making him look like a weary ghost. He takes your money without a word and hands you the prize, a large, surprisingly heavy white loaf. You hold it in your hands. It feels substantial. It feels like you've made a good choice, a smart investment in your own well-being. The crust is firm, and it looks clean and pure against the grimy backdrop of the London street. You turn away from the stall, already anticipating the simple pleasure of that first bite. You've successfully navigated your first economic transaction of the day. You've spent your money, and you have your food, but what you don't know is that the very thing you paid extra for, the whiteness, the weight, the supposed purity of this loaf, is a complete and utter lie. The baker, like nearly every baker in London, has a few secrets mixed into his dough, and you're about to eat them for breakfast. The real cost of this bread isn't measured in pennies, but in something far more valuable: your health. You find a relatively clean spot on the steps of a nearby building, huddling against the cold brick. The loaf of bread is still clutched in your hands. It's time for breakfast. You tear off a hunk of it, and the first thing you notice is the texture. It's not soft and fluffy as you'd expect from its pristine white appearance. It's dense, slightly damp, and has a strangely smooth, almost clay-like quality in your mouth. You begin to chew, and the taste is bland. Not the nutty, wholesome flavor of wheat, but a dull, neutral taste. There's a faint, almost imperceptible grittiness to it as well, but you dismiss it. In a city where every breath carries a dose of grit, it's easy to assume it's just the air. You are hungry, and this is food. That's what matters most. So you keep eating, tearing off piece after piece, filling the aching void in your stomach. What you are actually chewing on is a masterpiece of 19th century food fraud. The baker you just bought from is a businessman, and his primary goal isn't to nourish you, but to maximize his profit. So to make it go further, he bulks it out with cheaper, heavier substances. That brilliant whiteness you paid a premium for is not from high-quality, finely sifted flour. It's often enhanced with alum. Alum, or potassium aluminum sulfate, is a chemical compound that works wonders on low-grade flour. It bleaches it, making old or discolored flour look fresh and white. More importantly, it helps the proteins in the flour absorb more water, making the resulting loaf heavier. Since bread was often sold by weight, the baker could use less flour and more water, and still sell a heavy loaf for a higher price. It was pure, cynical profit. The problem is, you're not supposed to eat alum, and consuming it day after day leads to severe constipation and chronic stomach problems. That dull ache you always feel in your gut, this bread is a primary contributor. But the baker's deception doesn't necessarily stop there. The grittins you tasted wasn't just in your imagination. To add even more weight and whiteness, some of the most unscrupulous bakers would mix in other things. Chalk dust was a common additive. Plaster of Paris, a substance used for making casts and moldings, was another. Some even used powdered bones collected by bone grinders who scavenged animal skeletons from the streets and slaughterhouses. You are, in essence, eating your city's refuse. This practice was so widespread it was practically an open secret. Social reformers and early investigative journalists wrote about it with outrage. There's a famous, perhaps apocryphal, story of a man who bought a loaf, and upon cutting it, found a baker's waistcoat button inside. When he returned to complain, the baker simply replied, "Is that all I can assure you? You'll find a pair of breeches in the next one." Historians are still trying to determine just how much of this adulterated bread the average poor Londoner consumed. Was it an occasional hazard, or was nearly every single loaf a chemical cocktail? The surviving records from parliamentary inquiries and scientific investigations of the time suggest it was shockingly common, almost the norm in poorer districts. The consensus is that if you were poor in mid-19th century London, you were almost certainly eating alum-laced bread on a daily basis. As you finish your meager breakfast, the bread sits like a stone in your stomach. You feel full, which was the goal. But it's a heavy, lethargic fullness, not the satisfying energy of proper nourishment. You've traded nutrition for the illusion of quality, and your body will pay the price. You brush the crumbs from your lap, crumbs of wheat, chalk, and chemical salts, and get to your feet. The factory whistle will blow again soon, signaling the start of the workday. Grueling shift ahead of you, and you'll be powering through it on a breakfast of lies. The city is a machine, and it demands its fuel. It doesn't care what that fuel is made of, as long as it keeps the human cogs turning, at least for one more day. The slight, metallic aftertaste of alum lingers in your mouth as you merge back into the grimy, determined river of people flowing toward the factories. After a few hours of mind-numbing, repetitive work in the factory, you get a short break. The noise of the machinery temporarily subsides to a dull roar in the background, a brief respite for your ringing ears. You retreat to a corner with the other workers pulling a small, crumpled packet from your pocket. Inside are a few dried leaves, your ration for a midday cup of tea. Tea is more than just a drink, it's a ritual, a small moment of civilization in a brutal day. The warmth of the mug in your cold hands, the gentle steam rising, the brief, stimulating lift it provides, it's a vital comfort. In the 18th century, tea had been a luxury of the super-rich, locked away in ornate caddies. But by your time, thanks to the vast machinery of the British Empire and its trade routes, it has become the national drink beloved by all classes, or at least something that calls itself tea house. You join the queue for the large vat of hot water provided by the factory owner. It's not an act of kindness, it's a calculated move. A caffeinated worker is a more productive worker. You drop your leaves into a tin mug and pour the steaming, slightly murky water over them. You let it steep, watching as the water slowly turns a shade of brown. It looks like tea. It smells vaguely. Like tea. But as you take your first sip, the illusion shatters. The flavor is weak, earthy, and strangely metallic. There's a bitterness that has nothing to do with tannins and everything to do with chemistry. You've been had. The leaves in your cup have likely been on a very long journey, and you are not their first user. The demand for tea was so immense that a massive, clandestine industry sprang up around recycling used tea leaves. Servants in wealthy households would carefully save the tea leaves they cleaned out of their master's teapots. Instead of throwing them away, they would sell them to collectors, known as tea leafers. These collectors would then sell the soggy, spent leaves to specialized workshops. Here, the leaves would be dried out on hot copper plates. This process was often enhanced with a few toxic additives. To restore the black color, they would be mixed with graphite, a form of carbon also used for pencil lead. Sometimes sheep's dung was added for bulking the dark, earthy color. A chemical called tack was used to mimic the bitter, astringent taste of real tea. This concoction of old leaves, poison, and animal droppings was then packaged and sold as new tea to the grocers who supplied the urban poor. If your tea leaves weren't recycled, they might be something else entirely. Unscrupulous merchants would mix real tea with the dried leaves of other, cheaper plants like hawthorn or sloe. To make this fraudulent mixture look more convincing, they needed to add weight in the signature black color. This is where the metallic taste comes from. A common trick was to add iron filings or magnetic sand to the mix. It was an easy way to add weight, and the dark color blended in perfectly. There's a fascinating, if horrifying, cold case from the era about this. One of the first great food scientists, Arthur Hill Hassel, who we'll meet later, developed a simple test for this. He would just stir a magnet through a sample of tea. He often found the magnet came out covered in black iron particles, a clear sign of adulteration. It was a parlor trick that exposed a national scandal. Historians today are still piecing together the sheer scale of this counterfeit tea trade. Some accounts suggest that at its peak, the amount of fake tea being sold in London might have equaled the amount of genuine tea being legally imported. Think about that. For every legitimate cup of tea, there was a fraudulent one. The question that remains debated is how much the average person knew. Were you, the consumer, a completely naive victim, or was there a kind of unspoken understanding, a don't ask, don't tell policy where you knew the tea was cheap for a reason, but you bought it anyway because it was all you could afford? You stare into your mug of murky, metallic liquid. It's warm, and that's something, but the comfort it's meant to provide is tainted literally. You need the warmth, and you need to believe, just for a moment, that you are participating in a civilized ritual. Even if you know deep down that you are drinking the chemical brew of recycled leaves and industrial waste. It's another small, daily betrayal, another reminder that in this city, nothing is quite what it seems, especially not the things you put in your body. The break is over. You drain the last of the sad, bitter liquid and head back to the deafening roar of the machines. You return to your chilly tenement room after the long day's work is done. Your feet ache, your back is sore, and the gnawing hunger has returned with a vengeance. For dinner, you have another piece of your chocolate bread. Tonight, you'll treat yourself. You'll have it with a splash of milk. Milk, like bread, is a symbol of simple, wholesome nourishment. It evokes images of green pastures and healthy cows. It's what you give to children, to the sick. It's supposed to be pure. You bought a small amount from the milkman earlier this morning. He walks the streets with a large churn, dispensing milk into whatever jug or pail the customers provide. His cry of "Milko" is a familiar sound in the London dawn. You take out your small jug of milk. In the dim candlelight, it looks perfect. It's opaque and brilliantly, reassuringly white. You pour a little into a cup and add a piece of your bread to it, making a simple, soggy meal known as a pottage. It's a common dinner for someone like you. It's cheap, requires no cooking, and feels more substantial than just dry bread. As you lift the first spoonful to your mouth, you might notice a very slight chalky texture, but you'd probably attribute it to the bread. The milk itself tastes thin, watery, but you wouldn't be surprised. Nothing in your diet has a rich, full flavor. This is just the way things are. You eat your meal quietly, the silence of your room a stark contrast to the day's noise. But the milk in your cup is another ghost, a pale imitation of the real thing. Your milkman is at the heart of one of the most widespread and dangerous food rackets in the city. The journey of your milk began in a squalid, urban dairy. Forget green pastures. Most of London's dairy cows were kept in cramped, filthy sheds in the city itself, often right behind the dairyman's house. They were fed on brewery mash and distillery grains, lived in their own filth, and were frequently riddled with diseases like tuberculosis. The milk they produced was already of poor quality, but it would get much, much worse before it reached you. The first step for the milkman was to increase his volume. This was simple. He added water. A lot of water, sometimes up to 50%. This was known as the black cow, the water pump in the yard. Of course, this diluted milk looked thin and bluish, a dead giveaway. So he had to whiten it again. This is where the deception becomes truly disturbing. The most common whitener was chalk, mixed into a fine slurry and stirred into the churn. It restored the opaque, white color and also helped to mask any sour taste if the milk was beginning to turn. But other, more ghoulish whiteners were also used. A particularly notorious one was a substance called calf's brains. It sounds like a horror story, but it was a documented practice. Butchers would sell the brains of slaughtered calves to the milkman, who would mash them into a pulp and mix them into the watery milk. The fatty, emulsified brain tissue created a creamy texture and a convincing white color. So as you sit there, eating your simple meal, you are quite possibly consuming water from a dirty pump, chalk from a quarry, and the pulped brains of an animal, all served up as fresh milk. Historians still argue about the prevalence of the most extreme additives like brains. Some believe it was a shocking but rare practice, sensationalized by the press. Others argue that in the most competitive and impoverished neighborhoods, milkmen would do almost anything to stretch a profit, and such gruesome adulterations were more common than we'd like to believe. It's one of those stomach-turning historical details that exists in a grey area between documented fact and urban legend. This daily dose of dirty water and contaminants was a public health catastrophe. Contaminated milk was a primary vector for diseases, especially for the most vulnerable. It was a leading cause of the terrifyingly high infant mortality rate in the city. A mother, trying to give her baby the best start with what she thought was nutritious milk, could inadvertently be feeding it a fatal dose of bacteria. You finish your meal. The cup is empty. You felt a small sense of comfort, a fleeting moment of nourishment. But what you've actually done is introduce a fresh cocktail of bacteria and industrial-grade materials into your already struggling system. You wipe your mouth, unaware of the microscopic war that is about to be waged in your digestive tract. You only know that you are tired, and the lumpy straw mattress is waiting. As you lie down to sleep, you don't know that the very food meant to give you strength is actively working against you, chipping away at your health, one spoonful at a time. Let's imagine it's one of those mornings when the thought of another cup of weak, metallic tea is just too depressing to bear. You decide to spend your penny on a different morning ritual coffee. On your way to the factory, you see the familiar sight of a coffee stall, a rickety wooden cart with a large, steaming urn as center. A man, his face ruddy from the steam in the morning chill, is busy serving a line of customers. The aroma drifting from the stall is potent. It's dark, roast wine and bitter. It smells like strength. This is what you need. Something to jolt you awake, to cut through the fog in your head and the ache in your bones. Coffee was seen as the working man's drink, a sharp, serious beverage for a sharp, serious day of labor. It didn't have the civilized reputation of tea, but it promised a kit. You hand over your penny and receive a steaming mug of black, viscous liquid. There's no offer of milk or sugar at these cheap stalls. You take it as it comes. The heat is welcome in your cold hands. You take a sip. The taste is intense. It's incredibly bitter, with a harsh, almost burnt flavor and a thick, slightly gritty texture. It doesn't taste like the coffee you might imagine. There's a distinct earthy, root-like undertone, but it's hot, it's strong tasting, and in your mind, that's what coffee is supposed to be. You drink it down, feeling the bitter warmth spread through your chest. You have just enjoyed a classic cup of London coffee, a beverage that often contained little to no actual coffee. Coffee beans imported from colonies far across the sea were a valuable commodity. Just like with tea and bread, the temptation for vendors to use cheaper fillers was irresistible. The king of all coffee adulterants was chicory. Chicory is the root of a plant in the dandelion family. When roasted and ground, it produces a dark, bitter substance that looks a lot like coffee and can be brewed into a similar-looking beverage. It contains no caffeine, but it is very cheap. Mixing chicory into ground coffee was standard practice. In fact, it was so common that people came to expect that intensely bitter, slightly burnt taste. A cup of pure, real coffee would have tasted weak and insipid to them. They had become conditioned to the flavor of the fraud. But the creativity of the counterfeiters didn't stop with chicory. To add even more bulk and dark color, they would roast and grind all sorts of other things. Roasted acorns were a popular choice, gathered from the oak trees in London's parks. Burnt carrots, parsnips, and even beans were thrown into the roaster. Anything that could be carbonized, ground up, and pulsed for coffee was fair game. This explains the thick, almost syrupy texture of your drink. One of the most bizarre and frankly disgusting additives was roasted horse liver. Yes, you heard that right. Unscrupulous merchants would get cheap or condemned liver from slaughterhouses, roast it until it was black and hard, and then grind it into a fine powder. It added a dark color and a certain richness to the brew. It's a chilling thought the kick in your morning coffee might not have been caffeine, but the carbonized essence of a dead horse's organ. This is one of those historical facts that sounds like a macabre invention, but it's documented in the shocked reports of the era's food reformers. The debate among historians on this topic is fascinating. When did adulteration cross the line into becoming a new product? Some argue that the chicory and grain blend wasn't seen as fake coffee by the working class, but simply as coffee, a unique, affordable beverage in its own right, with its own expected taste profile. Did you, standing there drinking your bitter brew, feel cheated, or were you just drinking the normal, accepted morning drink of your class? It's a blurry line between fraud and the evolution of taste. Perhaps you knew on some level that this wasn't pure coffee, but the performance was all that mattered. The hot, black, bitter drink performed the role of coffee, and that was enough. You drain the last of the gritty liquid from your mug, hand it back to the vendor, and continue on your way. You don't feel the sharp, clear-headed buzz of caffeine, but you do feel a little warmer. The placebo effect perhaps is the most powerful ingredient of all. You've had your morning coffee. You feel, if not energized, at least ready to face the day. The bitter taste of the day, a constant reminder of a city where every sip and every bite is a transaction based on layers of carefully constructed deceit. The factory looms ahead, and your day is just beginning, powered by a cup of roasted roots and lies. Later in the day, perhaps during a brief lull, you decide to indulge in a rare treat. Someone, a more senior worker or a foreman, is passing around a small bag of sweets. He offers you one. It's a simple, hard candy, the kind sold for a half-penny to children and adults alike. Or maybe you've saved a fraction of a penny to buy a spoonful of sugar to stir into your sad cup of tea, a tiny rebellion against the bitterness of your life. Sugar is a miracle, a burst of pure, unadulterated pleasure. In a world of bland, adulterated starches, the intense sweetness of sugar is a jolt to the senses, a momentary escape. It's energy, it's joy, it's a tiny spark of luxury that even you can occasionally afford. You pop the hard candy into your mouth or stir the precious spoonful into your mug, anticipating that clean, sweet rush. But as the sugar dissolves on your tongue, something is off. There's a faint, but distinct grittiness, a sandy texture that doesn't quite melt away. You might not even question it. As we've established, grit is the invisible seasoning of all your food. You just accept it. The sweetness is there, and that's the main thing. You savor it, letting the pleasant sensation linger as long as possible. You've just encountered one of the most basic, yet most infuriating, forms of food adulteration. Your sugar is almost certainly cut with sand. It was a ridiculously simple and effective fraud. Sugar, especially the brownish, less refined sold by weight. A grocer or candy maker could significantly increase their profits by simply mixing in a scoop of fines and or dust from the floor. The color blended in perfectly with the unrefined sugar, and the extra weight was pure profit. This wasn't just limited to the cheapest sugars. Even the more expensive whiter sugars weren't safe. They would be mixed with things like rice flour or chalk dust to add weight and volume. The deception was tailored to the product. But for the coarse, brown sugar that was your daily reality, sand and dirt were the adulterants of choice. It was a fraud that was both cynical and symbolic, literally selling you the dirt off the floor. And it gets worse. Think about where this filler sand and dust came from. The floors of the warehouses and shops where the sugar was stored were far from clean. They were filthy surfaces, home to insects, rodent droppings, and all manner of bacteria. So, with your spoonful of sugar, you were also getting a spoonful of the warehouse floor's ecosystem. A particularly nasty little secret of the sugar trade involved something called sugar mites. These were microscopic creatures, a type of arachnid that infested raw, unprocessed sugar as it sat in damp warehouses. They were so common that an ailment known as grocer's itch, a type of skin rash, was a well-known occupational hazard for those who handled sugar all day. While these mites were mostly invisible to the naked eye, you were consuming them with every sweet bite. Some scientists of the period even tried to raise the alarm, publishing drawings of the mites they'd found under the microscope, but to little effect. It's a profoundly unpleasant thought the sweet treat you crave is writhing with microscopic life. The historical debate here isn't about whether this happened. It absolutely did, but about its direct impact on public health. While the large-scale adulteration, tests like alum in bread or water in milk were obvious culprits for disease, what was the effect of this low-level, gritty contamination? Did the constant ingestion of sand and dirt contribute to the chronic digestive issues so common among the poor? Did the sugar mites cause allergic reactions or other internal problems? It's much harder for historians and scientists to prove a direct causal link, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Your body was not just fighting against major poisons, it was also dealing with a constant, grinding assault of minor contaminant. So you let the last of the sweetness dissolve in your mouth. The pleasant sensation is gone, but the fine, sandy residue remains. It's a tiny annoyance, a subtle flaw, and a rare moment of pleasure. You don't think much of it. You can't afford, and every bite would be to drive yourself mad. You have to accept it, to push the thought away and focus on the task at hand. The sweetness was fleeting, but the work is constant. You swallow the grit and get back to it. The memory of that small, tainted pleasure already fading. In a life as hard as yours, you learn to take your joys where you can find them, no matter what they're mixed with. The factory whistle screams, signaling the end of the workday. 12, maybe 14 hours after you started, you are released back onto the streets of London. Your body is a symphony of aches, your mind numb with fatigue. The thought of going back to your cold room and gnawing on another piece of dry, chalky bread is utterly demoralizing. You need something hot, something that feels like a real meal. As you join the river of exhausted workers flowing away from the factory districts, the smell cuts through the usual London smog. It's rich, meaty, and savory with the warm, inviting aroma of baked pastry. It's the smell of a hot pie. You follow your nose to its source of Heman, standing on a street corner with a large, heated metal canister. He has a stack of hot meat pies, each one a perfect golden brown parcel of promised delight. Hot pies, get your hot pies here, he calls out, his voice a familiar part of the city's soundscape. Street food is the lifeblood of the working class. It's fast, it's cheap, and it's hot. In an era when most of the poor don't have access to proper kitchens or the fuel to cook, street vendors provide an essential service. And the meat pie is the undisputed king of this culinary world. It's a self-contained meal. You get meat, gravy, and pastry all in one convenient, handheld package. It's the 19th century equivalent of a burger or a slice of pizza. You watch as the peaman sells one to a customer. He plucks a hot pie from his canister, makes a small incision in the crust with a knife, and funnels in a ladle a fuel of steaming dark gravy. The customer pays a penny, takes the pie, and walks away, eagerly blowing on it before taking a massive bite. Your stomach groans. The temptation is overwhelming. A single penny. That's all it costs for this moment of hot, savory bliss. It feels like an incredible bargain. A whole meal, hot and ready, for the same price as a disappointing cup of coffee or a small, questionable oyster. It's a deal that seems too good to be true. You fumble in your pocket for a coin. This is a justifiable expense. This isn't a frivolous luxury like sugar, this is sustenance. This is the fuel you need to be able to get up and do it all again tomorrow. You step up to the vendor, your penny held out. "One pie, please." He grins, a professional practiced grin. He performs the ritual, takes the pie, pierces the crust, and fills it with that mysterious bubbling gravy. He hands it to you. It's almost hot to hold. The warmth seeps through the thin pastry, a comforting heat against your cold, work-roughened hands. The smell is intoxicating. You step away from the cart, seeking a quiet doorway to enjoy your feast. The allure of the street pie was immense, and it's a detail historians love to focus on because it reveals so much about urban life. The peaman wasn't just selling convenience and comfort. For tens of thousands of Londoners, he was their cook. The image of the peaman is so iconic it even made its way into nursery rhymes and, more grimly, into the legend of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, who supposedly turned his victims into the filling for Mrs. Lovett's meat pies. While the Sweeney Todd story is fiction, it preys on a very real, very widespread anxiety. What, exactly, is inside these pies? The folk tale itself is a sort of academic debate of the streets, a macabre expression of the public's deep-seated suspicion about the contents of their cheap food. Was it just a scary story, or did it reflect a terrifying truth about the mystery meat culture of the city? You hold the pie in your hands, a perfect, self-contained object of desire. It represents a solution to your immediate problems: hunger, cold, and exhaustion. You've worked hard all day, and you feel you've earned this. This single, hot, savory pie feels like a just reward. You lift it to your mouth, the steam warming your face. The pastry is flaky, the gravy is rich, and the promise of a meaty, satisfying filling is just a single bite away. The question of its contents is a distant, academic worry. Right now, all that matters is the immediate, overwhelming need to eat. You are about to take that first fateful bite, and in doing so, you are placing your trust entirely in the hands of a man who sold you a penny meal on a dark London street corner. You take the first bite. The pastry cracks and gives way, a satisfying crunch. It's greasy and savory, and it's delicious in the way that only hot, fatty food can be to a hungry person. Then you hit the filling. It's a soft, minced mixture, swimming in a thick, peppery gravy. The texture is ambiguous. It's definitely meat of some kind, but it's been chopped so finely and cooked for so long that it's impossible to identify any specific cut. You take another bite, chewing thoughtfully. The flavor is overwhelmingly of salt and black pepper. The spices are aggressive, masking whatever the underlying taste of the meat might be. This is a common culinary trick. Then as now, when the quality of the main ingredient is low, you crank up the seasoning. You can taste onion, maybe a bit of thyme mixed in as a filler, but the meat itself remains a mystery. Is it beef, mutton, pork? It's impossible to say. You just know that it's hot, savory, and filling. And for a penny, you don't ask questions. But let's ask the question for you. What are you actually eating? The grim reality is that the filling of your penny pie is almost certainly not made from fresh, quality cuts of meat. That kind of meat was far too expensive. The pie makers, like all street vendors, were masters of economy, using the cheapest ingredients available. The filling for these pies was typically made from scraps and trimmings, the parts of the animal that a respectable butcher couldn't sell. This could include organ meat, sinew, and bits of fat. Often the meat came from animals that were not fit for regular consumption. This was known as slink meat, veal from calves that had been born dead or had died shortly after birth, or it might be clinker red meat, from animals that had died of disease. There was a thriving black market for these diseased carcasses. Unscrupulous farmers and butchers would sell them for a tiny fraction of the price of a healthy animal to businesses that catered to the poor, like pie makers and sausage stuffers. The logic was grimly practical once the meat was boiled for hours and drowned in spicy gravy. Who could tell the difference? Your pie might also contain meat that wasn't from a cow or a sheep at all. Horse meat was common, being much cheaper than beef. But the most feared and whispered about ingredient was cat. The city was full of stray cats, and the urban legend that some of them ended up in penny pies was persistent and widespread. While it's difficult for historians to prove how common this practice actually was, the fear itself was a powerful force. The term perned mew pie was a piece of dark London slang for a reason. One of the strangest and most documented non-traditional pie fillings was eel. The Thames was thick with eels, which thrived in the polluted water. They were cheap and plentiful, and jellied eels became a classic London working-class dish. It was only a small leap to put them in a pie, so that soft, slightly gelatinous texture of your filling it might not be overcooked mutton, but chopped up Thames eel. The academic debate rages on about the true average composition of a penny meat pie. Were they mostly just low-grade but legitimate mutton and beef scraps, with the diseased meat and cat stories being rare, sensational exceptions, or was the entire street pie industry built on a foundation of unique and fightable, potentially dangerous ingredients? The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in the middle. The filling likely varied wildly from vendor to vendor, and from day to day. Eating a street pie was a game of culinary roulette. You finish the last bite of your pie, it's gone. The warmth in your hands has faded, but the warmth in your stomach remains. You feel full, genuinely full, for the first time all day. The heavy, greasy meal sits in your gut, a satisfying anchor. Was it beef? Was it eel? Was it something worse? You'll never know. And perhaps you don't want to. You successfully navigated another meal. You paid your penny, you took your chances, and you were rewarded with a hot, filling dinner. You wiped the last of the grease from your chin with the back of your hand. The mystery of the pie's contents is forgotten as you turn your thoughts toward the only thing that matters now, getting back to your room and collapsing into a few precious hours of sleep before the factory whistle screams again. The pie was a gamble, and for tonight at least it feels like you've won. Let's pull the camera back for a moment, away from your personal struggle for a decent meal. Let's look at the bigger picture. Where does all this stuff, the real tea, the fake tea, the sugar, the spices, the grain for the bread, even come from? Your journey for food may end on a street corner, but it begins in a place of pure, magnificent chaos, the London docks. Imagine you're taking a walk along the Thames, east of the city centre. The air changes. The familiar smell of coal smoke is now mixed with the salty tang of the estuary, the smell of wet rope, tar, and exotic spices from faraway lands. The noise is immense, a cacophony of shouting men, creaking cranes, rattling chains, and the groaning of timber as massive ships strain against their moorings. This is the heart of the British Empire, the engine room of global trade. You stand at the edge of a wharf, looking out at a forest of masts. Ships are arriving from every corner of the globe. From China, carrying tea. From the West Indies, laden with sugar and rum. From America, with cotton and tobacco. From India, with spices and indigo. The sheer volume of goods is staggering. Crates, barrels, and sacks are being hoisted from the holds of ships and piled high on the quayside, creating canyons of cargo. This is where the first opportunity for adulteration begins, right here in the open air. The system is overwhelmed. There are too many ships, too much cargo, and not enough inspectors or secure warehouses. The docks are a free-for-all. As soon as a sack of coffee beans or a barrel of sugar is unloaded, it's vulnerable. Dockworkers, known as longshoremen, were notoriously poorly paid. The temptation to supplement their income was huge. They developed ingenious ways to steal small amounts of cargo, a practice known as fiddling. A common trick was to use a special tool called a troyer, a long, hollow tube that could be inserted into a sack or a barrel to draw out a sample of its contents. A worker could sample a little bit from every sack of coffee he handled, accumulating a significant amount by the end of the day to sell on the black market. Spices were even easier. A dock worker might be covered in what looked like dust at the end of a shift, but it was actually valuable cinnamon or pepper that he would literally brush off himself and collect. It was death by 1,000 cuts for the merchants and the start of a long chain of fraud. But the real problem wasn't just theft, it was organized, large-scale adulteration that happened right on the docks. Imagine a crate of tea has been damaged, exposed to seawater. It's ruined. But is it thrown away? Of course not. It's sold for cheap to a dotted goods merchant, who will take it to a workshop, dry it out, mix it with other substances, and resell it as perfectly good tea. You see barrels of what is supposed to be rum, but you hear whispers that they've been topped up with water and cheap industrial spirits right here on the wharf. A fascinating and weirdly specific example of dockside fraud involved pepper. Black peppercorns were valuable, but the dust and sweepings from the floor of the pepper warehouses, a mixture of dirt, pepper dust, and anything else on the floor, was known by the trade name P.D., which stood for pepper dust. This P.D. was worthless, but it was collected and sold to unscrupulous spice merchants. They would then mix it back into their ground pepper, or sometimes they would form the dust into little pellets using gum and liquor, creating counterfeit peppercorns. What you buy in a shop as pepper could literally be the sweepings from the warehouse floor. Historians often debate the level of official complicity in all of this, where the customs officers, the dock managers, and the police turning a blind eye. Was there a level of corruption that went all the way to the top, or was the system simply too chaotic and vast to be controlled? The evidence suggests a mixture of both. There were certainly corrupt officials who could be bribed, but the sheer scale of the operation was the biggest issue. London's trade had grown too fast, and the regulations and infrastructure hadn't caught up. It was a wild, unregulated frontier. You stand there, a small, insignificant figure dwarfed by the scale of it all. You are watching the global economy in action. You see the immense wealth and power of the empire on full display. But you also see the rot at its core. You see the chaos of petty theft and the organized crime that ensures that by the time these goods reach a person like you, they will have been tampered with, diluted, and debased at every step of the journey. The slice of bread you eat, the cup of tea you drink, the pie you buy on the street, their fate is sealed right here, amidst the shouting and the grime of the docks. This is the source of the river of fraud that flows through the city's markets and into your stomach. Let's leave the noisy docks and take a walk along the river that makes it all possible, the Thames. This river is the city's main artery. It's the source of its power, its wealth, and its identity. From where you stand on one of the new, grand bridges like Waterloo or London Bridge, it can look almost majestic, a wide, flowing ribbon of water reflecting the sky. Poets have written moody beauty, but you are not a poet or a painter. You are a Londoner. And you know the truth. You lean over the stone parapet and look down, not at the reflection of the sky, but at the water itself. It's not clear or blue, or even green. It's a murky, opaque brown, thick with sediment and filth. Large, unidentifiable objects drift slowly past on the current. The surface is coated in a greasy, iridescent film that shimmers with all the colors of the rainbow, the telltale sign of industrial runoff. The smell. On a hot day, it's an almost physical assault, a miasma of rotten decay that rises from the water and blankets the entire city. This is the great, terrible secret of 19th century London. The majestic River Thames is not a river. It's an open sewer. For centuries, London had disposed of its waste in cesspits, brick-lined pits dug beneath houses. But the city was growing too fast. The cesspits were overflowing. The invention of the flushing toilet, a wonderful new piece of technology for those who could afford it, made the problem exponentially worse. Each flush sent gallons of water and waste into the already overwhelmed cesspits. The city's authorities made a fateful decision. They decreed that all cesspits must be connected to the old network of sewers that drained, you guessed it, directly into the Thames. It was a decision born of desperation, a classic case of solving one problem by creating a much, much bigger one. Overnight, the river became the final destination for the untreated waste of over 2 million people. Every day, hundreds of tons of human excrement poured into the heart of the city. But that was just the beginning. The river was also the dumping ground for every other kind of waste imaginable. The new factories lining its banks discharged a toxic cocktail of chemical byproducts directly into the water. Slaughterhouses, which processed thousands of animals a day, would simply wash the blood, offal, and animal parts into the river. The water, running in the gutters of the city, filled with horse manure and rotting garbage, all eventually found its way into the Thames. You are looking at a river of human sewage, industrial poison, and slaughterhouse runoff. A weirdly fascinating, if stomach-turning, piece of trivia from this time is the existence of TCRS. These were a type of scavenger, men who would wade into the sewer outflows at low tide, searching for anything of value that might have been flushed away: coins, pieces of metal, lost jewelry. It was a dangerous, foul, but sometimes profitable profession. They were the bottom feeders of the London economy, literally living off the city's waste. The state of the river was so famously awful that it led to an event in the summer of 1858 known as the Great Stink. A heatwave caused the water level in the Thames to drop, and the sun baked the thick layers of exposed sewage on the riverbanks. The smell was so overpowering, so monumentally foul, that it brought the city to a standstill. The Houses of Parliament, located right on the riverbank, became unbearable. Politicians tried to soak their curtains in chloride of lime to mask the stench, but it was no use. They were forced to debate with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. It was the Great Stink that finally shamed Parliament into funding the creation of a modern, integrated sewer system, the Great Engineering Project led by Joseph Bozelettage. But that solution is years in your future. Right now, you are living in the thick of the problem. And here is the most terrifying part of all. You look down at this horrifying, toxic soup, and you realize something. This is where your drinking water comes from. There are no magical pipes bringing fresh water from pristine reservoirs in the countryside. The private water companies that supply London draw their water directly from this very same river. They might have their intake pipes a little further upstream, but the tidal nature of the Thames meant that the sewage from central London was often pushed back upstream with the incoming tide. The separation was a fiction. Historians still debate the level of public awareness about this. Did people truly understand the connection between the sewer river and their drinking water? The evidence suggests that while the educated elite were becoming horrificously aware of the link, thanks to the work of scientists like John Snow, the average person like you might not have grasped the full, terrifying reality. You knew the water was dirty, of course, but the concept of invisible germs, of microscopic bacteria causing disease, was still a new undalien idea. You just knew that the water oft untasted bad, and that people got sick. You pull back from the bridge's edge, a profound sense of unease settling over you. The river that is the source of London's life is also the source of its death. It's a vast, slow-moving ribbon of poison flowing through the center of your world. It's either very early in the morning or late at night, the only times you're not at work. You have a chore to do, one of the most essential and most dreaded: fetching the water. You pick up the heavy wooden bucket, or perhaps a pair of them connected by a yoke across your shoulders to make the load more manageable. You don't have a tap in your room. The idea of clean, running water being piped directly into your home is a fantasy, a luxury reserved for the wealthiest Londoners. For you and the thousands of others crammed into your neighborhood, getting water means a trip to a communal source. This could be a public pump in a courtyard, or, more likely, a standpipe in the street, which is connected to the local water company's mains. You join a long, slow-moving queue of women and children, all waiting their turn. The standpipe is only turned on for a few hours a day, a deliberate policy by the water companies to conserve water and ensure people didn't waste it. This creates a daily scene of social tension and desperation. Arguments break out, people jostle for position. It can sometimes take an hour or more to reach the front of the line and for your bucket. When it's finally your turn, you hold your bucket under the iron spout and turn the handle. Water gushes out. It's not clear and sparkling. It's often yellowish or brownish, cloudy with suspended particles. You might see tiny things wriggling in it. These are domphia or water fleas, and other small crustaceans. In a strange twist of public perception, The presence of these little creatures was often seen as a good sign. The thinking was, if these things can live in the water, it must be clean enough to drink. It's a tragically flawed piece of folk science. You heave the now heavy bucket and begin the laborious journey back to your room. The water sloshes over the sides, splashing onto your clothes and the filthy street. By the time you get it home, it's already been contaminated by the grime of the city. You set the bucket in a corner of your room, and this is your water supply for the day, for drinking, for cooking, for washing. The water itself is a gamble, the daily roll of the dice with disease. The private water companies, driven by profit, took their water from the most convenient source, the Thames. As we've established, the Thames was a sewer. The companies would draw the water into reservoirs, where some of the solid matter was supposed to settle. This was their idea of filtration. But it did nothing to remove the invisible bacteria teeming within. This is how cholera, the great terror of the 19th century city, spread with such devastating speed. Cholera is a waterborne disease. An infected person's waste, teeming with the Vibrio cholerae bacterium, would enter the sewer system, flow into the Thames, and be sucked right back into the pipes of a water company. It would then be pumped directly into the homes and standpipes of thousands of unsuspecting people. A single cholera case could trigger a massive, explosive outbreak in a matter of days. The most famous story of this deadly connection is that of John Snow and the Broad Street pump outbreak in 1854. During a severe cholera outbreak in Soho, Snow did something revolutionary. He didn't just treat the sick, he mapped them. He plotted every cholera death on a map of the neighborhood and noticed they were all clustered around a single public water pump on Broad Street. He investigated and discovered that the well for this pump had been contaminated by a nearby leaking cesspit where the waste from the outbreak's first victim, a sick baby, had been disposed of. He convinced the local authorities to remove the handle from the pump, and the outbreak almost immediately subsided. It was a landmark moment in the history of public health and epidemiology. However, one of the curious, lesser-known details of the Broad Street pump story is that there was a brewery right next to the pump where none of the workers got sick. Why? Because they were given a daily ration of beer and were told not to drink the water. The process of brewing, which involved boiling the water, had unknowingly sterilized it, saving their lives. It's a perfect, if grim, little historical anecdote. The academic controversy here is not about the facts, but about how long it took for the establishment to accept them. Even after John Snow presented his compelling evidence, many in the scientific and political community clung to the old miasma theory, the idea that diseases like cholera were spread by bad smells and foul air, not by contaminated water. The idea of invisible agents in the water was just too radical for many to accept. The debate between the miasmatists and the contagionists raged for years, and while it did, thousands more people died. You take a ladle and scoop some water from your bucket into a cup. You let the sediment settle for a moment before you drink. You are thirsty. You lift the cup to your lips, not knowing if the water you are about to swallow contains the agent of your own death. Every sip is an act of blind faith, a desperate hope that this time you'll be lucky. You drink, and the cool, slightly foul-tasting liquid slides down your throat. You have survived another drink. For now. Let's imagine you've had a slightly better week. You've earned an extra shilling, and you decide to treat yourself to a proper piece of meat for your Sunday dinner. Not a mysterious pie filling, but an actual identifiable cut. You can't afford to go to one of the respectable-looking butcher shops on the main high street, with their clean tile fronts and plump cuts of beef and lamb displayed proudly in the window. Those places are for the middle class. Your budget sends you down a different path. You head into the labyrinth of back alleys and narrow lanes that make up the city's hidden commercial world. Here, the shops are shabbier, the smells are stronger, and the prices are lower. You find a butcher's stall tucked away in a dimly lit passageway. The shop is little more than a wooden counter set up in an open-fronted room. A few carcasses hang from hooks in the back, shrouded in shadow. On the counter are trays of meat, looking a little pale and limp compared to the vibrant red cuts on the high street. The butcher himself is a formidable figure, his apron stained with old blood, a large cleaver resting on the wooden block beside him. He eyes you as you approach, sizing you up, calculating what you can afford. You point to a small, cheap-looking piece of mutton. He names a price. It's still a stretch, but you can just about manage it. He hacks it off, wraps it in a piece of newspaper, and you hand over your precious coins. You now have the centerpiece of a rare, luxurious meal. You turn to leave, but a strange noise from the alley behind the shop catches your attention. A low, pathetic moan. Curiosity gets the better of you. You peek around the corner into the butcher's backyard, and what you see makes your stomach turn. The yard is a tiny, filthy enclosure. In one corner, there are a few live sheep huddled together, their wool matted with filth. But in another corner is an animal lying on its side, its breathing shallow and dragged. It's clearly shallow and dragged. It's clearly sick, perhaps dying. This is the butcher's house. This is where he gets the cheap meat that allows him to undercut the prices of the high street shop. He is a slink butcher, a dealer in diseased or unfit meat. He buys animals that are too sick or old to be sold in the legitimate markets. Farmers, rather than losing all their money on a diseased cow or sheep, would sell it for a pittance to a butcher like this. The butcher would then slaughter the animal in his backyard, away from any prying eyes, and sell the meat to the unsuspecting poor. The meat from these animals was often discolored or had a bad smell. To disguise this, the butchers had a whole arsenal of tricks. They would rub the surface of the meat with a little bit of animal blood to give it a fresh, red appearance. If the meat was from a pig that had died of something like swine fever, it would often be pale and flabby. The butcher might inject it with a solution of salted potassium nitrate to make it firmer and pinker, passing it off as cured bacon. A particularly grim and specific piece of law from this trade concerns the livers of the animals. Often the liver would be riddled with parasitic cysts or abscesses. A slink butcher wouldn't throw this away. He would carefully cut out the diseased parts with a small knife, a process known as trimming. He would then artfully arrange the good parts of the liver for sale, hoping no one would look too closely. It's a horrificously precise image of deception. The academic debate here revolves around the knowledge of the consumer. Did you, the buyer, have any idea what you were purchasing, or were you a completely innocent victim? Some historians argue that many poor customers knew exactly what they were buying. They couldn't afford healthy meat, so they knowingly bought diseased meat because it was better than no meat at all. This was a perks of the job transaction in the grimmest sense. They were making a calculated risk, hoping that a thorough cooking would kill whatever was wrong with it. Others argue that the butcher's deceptions were so skillful that most customers were genuinely fooled, believing they were getting a bargain on good meat. The truth is likely a messy combination of both. You pull back from the alley, your heart pounding. The package in your hand suddenly feels heavy and unclean. The grand Sunday dinner you were planning is now tainted with the image of that poor dying animal. You hurry away from the butcher's stall, back into the relative anonymity of the crowded street. You have a choice to make. Do you throw the meat away, wasting the money you worked so hard for, or do you take it home, cook it thoroughly, and try to forget what you saw? For most people in your position, there is no real choice. Waste is a sin you cannot afford to commit. You will boil it for hours, creating a scum-topped broth, and tell yourself that the heat has purified it. You will eat it, because you must, but the pleasure is gone, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety. You have seen for a brief moment the hidden machinery of your food supply, and it is a terrifying, sickening sight. Let's imagine you're not buying from a back alley butcher or a street corner payment today. Instead, you're heading to a proper market. Not one of the grand, covered markets like Covent Garden, which is becoming a tourist attraction, but a sprawling, chaotic, open-air street market in a neighborhood like Whitechapel or the Borough. This is where London comes to shop. The market is a sensory explosion. The air is thick with the shouts of 1,000 vendors, each one extolling the virtues of their products. Fresh fish, straight from the river. Lovely ripe apples, twopence a pound. The finest cheese in all of London. The noise is deafening, the crowds are dense, and you have to keep your wits about you and a hand on your pocket. The stalls are piled high with a dizzying array of goods. There are pyramids of vegetables, baskets of fish glistening on wet slabs, wheels of pickles. It looks like a picture of abundance, a testament to the city's ability to feed itself. But as you navigate the crowded aisles, you begin to realize that this market is a battlefield, and you are an unarmed soldier. There are no rules here, no trading standards, no health inspectors, no consumer protection laws to speak of. It is a world of cavey attempt to let the buyer beware. Every transaction is a duel of wits between you and the seller. You approach a stall selling butter. The vendor offers you a taste from a small pat on the counter. It tastes fine, but the larger block of butter you actually buy might be a different story. It was common practice to blend butter with cheaper fats like lard or mutton tallow. Some vendors would even mix in water and flour to increase its weight, a practice that led to the butter turning rancid very quickly. You move on to a greengrocer's stall. The vegetables look vibrant and fresh, but you've heard the stories. Old, wilting vegetables are often refreshed by being boiled with a few copper coins. The copper leaches into the vegetables, giving them a bright, healthy-looking green color. It's a cosmetic trick that also happens to be poisonous. Even the scales are your enemy. You watch a grocer weighing out some potatoes for a customer. He uses a set of balanced scales with iron weights. But are the weights accurate? It was incredibly common for sellers to use doctored weights, hollowed-out iron weights that had been filled with a lighter material like lead, or simply weights that were stamped with a higher value than their actual mass. Another common trick was to have a thumb strategically placed on the scale, adding just enough pressure to tip the balance in their favor. You're not just paying for the product, you're paying for the weight of the grocer's greed. A particularly clever and lesser-known scam involved the scoops used for dry goods like flour or peas. A dishonest shopkeeper might use a scoop with a false bottom, making it look much larger than it actually was. You think you're buying a full scoop, but you're only getting 3/4 of one. It's a subtle deception, almost impossible to spot unless you were specifically looking for it. The very concept of freshness is a lie. There is no refrigeration. Fish is caught, brought to market, and laid out on a slab. If it doesn't sell by the end of the day, it's not thrown out. It might be heavily salted and sold as preserved fish. Or it might just be put out again the next day. It's smell masked by a splash of vinegar. The fishmonger shouting about his fresh catch might be selling you something that's been out of the water for days. Historians are fascinated by the social dynamics of these markets. It wasn't just a place of commerce, it was a place of performance. The vendors were actors, their stage a small wooden stall, their loud calls, their banter with customers, their theatrical weighing of goods. It was all part of a show designed to build a fragile, momentary trust. The question that historians still debate is the extent to which this was a game everyone understood. Did shoppers expect to be cheated a little? Was a certain amount of low-level fraud just priced into the transaction, an accepted part of the market's culture? Or was every cheated customer a genuinely duped victim? You finally decide to buy something simple, an apple. It seems safe. How can anyone adulterate an apple? You pick one that looks good, pay your penny, and walk away, polishing it on your sleeve. But even this simple act is fraught with unseen danger. The farmer who grew it might have used pesticides that were highly toxic, like arsenic-based powders, which were new and poorly understood. The apple might look perfect, but its skin could be coated in a fine layer of poison. You walk away from the market, your small purchase in hand. The noise and the chaos recede behind you. You haven't been robbed, but you have almost certainly been cheated, in ways big or small, visible or invisible. The market, which at first glance seemed like a vibrant place of abundance, is revealed to be something else entirely, a complex system of micro-frauds. A daily battle where the odds are permanently stacked against you. As you walk away from the chaotic market, you pass a different kind of stall, one that's lowered to the ground and swarmed not by weary adults, but by excited children. It's a sweet shop, or rather a makeshift candy stall. The vendor, an old woman with a shrewd glint in her eye, presides over a tray of colorful treats. The candies are dazzling, especially against the relentlessly grey and brown backdrop of the city. There are vibrant red lozenges, brilliant yellow lemon drops, and stunningly green candied fruits. They are beautiful, jewel-like things, and they are incredibly cheap. For a farthing, a child can buy a moment of pure, colorful joy. You watch as a little boy, his face already smudged with dirt, hands over a coin and receives a bright red candy stick. He immediately pops it in his mouth, his face a picture of bliss. It's a charming scene, a small island of childhood innocence in a harsh world. But you are looking at one of the most insidious and terrifying forms of adulteration in the entire city. The brilliant colors that make these sweets so appealing are not derived from harmless food dyes. They are created using highly toxic industrial and mineral pigments, the same chemicals used to paint walls or dye fabrics. But vibrant red candy the boy is sucking on its color comes from red lead, a lead oxide. It's a cheap and potent pigment, but it's also a powerful neurotoxin. The sunny yellow of the lemon drops is likely achieved with lead chromate, another lead-based compound. And the beautiful, vivid green that's the most dangerous of all. That color comes from a pigment called Scheele's green, which is made from copper arsenite. Yes, arsenic. The children are literally eating poison for fun. The candy makers weren't necessarily evil villains trying to poison children. They were simply ignorant, operating in a pre-scientific world. They were using the cheapest, most effective coloring agents available to them, with no understanding of the long-term health consequences. To them, lead and arsenic were just pigments, no different from any other. They were trying to make their product attractive to their customers, and bright colors sold well. The apathetic ignorance extended to the very substance of the candy itself. The sugar, as we know, was likely bulked out with chalk or plaster of Paris. This was especially true for white, peppermint-flavored candies. The confectioner could use less expensive sugar if the bulk of the product was just an inedible, but harmless-looking plaster. A famous and horrifying case from Bradford in 1858 illustrates this perfectly. A confectioner sent his assistant to a local druggist to buy what he thought was plaster of Paris, which he called Darf, to mix into his peppermint lozenges. The druggist's assistant, by mistake, gave him arsenic triazgate instead. The confectioner used the arsenic, thinking it was plaster, and made a huge batch of candies. He sold them at a market stall. Over 200 people were poisoned, and more than 20 died. The event became known as the Bradford Sweets poisoning and was a major scandal that highlighted the terrifying lack of regulation. One of the more obscure but equally unsettling facts about this industry involved the use of non-food ingredients to create certain textures. To make gummy, gelatinous sweets, some confectioners would use mucilage, a type of glue. You weren't just eating poison, you were eating office supplies. Historians still debate the true death toll from this casual, everyday poisoning. How many children who died of consumption or wasting sickness were actually the victims of slow, chronic lead or arsenic poisoning from their occasional penny sweets? It's impossible to know for sure. The symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, stomach pains, developmental delays, lethargy could easily be mistaken for any number of other common childhood diseases of the era. It's a hidden epidemic, its true scale lost to history. You look again at the children clustered around the candy store, their faces alight with excitement as they choose their favorite color. They are so happy, so oblivious. The vendor herself probably has no idea of the harm she is causing. She sees herself as a purveyor of joy, a bringer of small pleasures to the neighborhood's poorest children. She is, in fact, a purveyor of poison. The scene, which moments ago seemed charming, now feels deeply tragic. It's a perfect metaphor for the city itself, something that looks bright and alluring on the surface, but is rotten and dangerous underneath. You turn away, a feeling of sadness and helplessness washing over you. There are so many dangers in this city, so many hidden traps. And the most vulnerable, the children, are drawn to the most brightly colored, most enticing dangers of all. The image of the boy with the red candy sticks eared into your mind, a tiny, cheerful harbinger of a slow, invisible death. The day's work is done, the meager meal has been eaten, and you find yourself with a rare evening of freedom and a few extra pennies in your pocket. There's one place that calls to you, a place that offers warmth, light, and company. It's the cornerstone of your community, the social hub for the working class, the public house or pub. You push open the heavy wooden door and are immediately enveloped in a wave of warm, FUGGY air. The pub is loud, crowded, and brightly lit by gas lamps that hiss and flicker. casting a cheerful yellow glow over everything. The air is thick with the smell of tobacco smoke, spilled beer and damp wool. Men are crowded around the bar, leaning in to shout their orders. Others are sitting at small, round tables, talking, arguing, laughing. This is the living room you don't have at home. It's a refuge from the cold, the darkness, and the cramped misery of your tenement room. You make your way to the bar and order a pint of beer. It's the cheapest thing on offer, the fuel of this social engine. The public enrolls it from a large wooden cask, the dark liquid foaming up into a thick, creamy head in the pewter tankard. He slides it across the sticky, beer-soaked counter to you. You hand over your pennies and retreat to a corner to make the drink last as long as possible. You take a long swallow. The beer is not crisp and refreshing. It's heavy, slightly sweet, and has a noticeable saltness to it. It makes you thirsty. After a few more sips, you find yourself wanting another one. It's surprisingly effective. You also feel a strange, slightly drowsy, muddled sensation setting in faster than you'd expect. Your pint of beer, the supposed liquid bread of the working man, is another chemical concoction, a masterpiece of pub chemistry designed for one purpose: to make you drink more and to cost the publican less. The base of the beer was often weak, brewed with less malt and hops to save money. The publican would then use a variety of additives, a practice known as fobbing, to make it taste and feel like a stronger, better quality brew. The saltness you taste is deliberate. Publicans would often add salt to their beer. Why? Because salt makes you thirsty. The more you drink, the thirstier you get, and the more beer you buy. It's a simple but brutally effective business model. They were not just selling you a drink, they were selling you thirst. To mimic the bitterness of hops, which were expensive, some brewers and publicans would add copperas or ferrous sulfate. It provided the desired bitter taste, but it was also known to cause vomiting and convulsions if consumed in large quantities. To create a thick, frothy head on a weak beer, a mixture of alum, the same stuff used in your bread and copperas, was often used. This created a lasting, stable foam that looked appealing but was, of course, poisonous. The most sinister additives, however, were the narcotics. To give the beer an extra kick and to get customers hooked, some publicans would add a substance called grains of paradise. This was a pungent West African spice that gave a hot, peppery flavor and had a mild, intoxicating effect. But the real secret weapon was opiates. It was rumored, and occasionally proven, that some of the most unscrupulous publicans would add a small amount of low cohort and alcohol to their barrels. This would give the beer a potent, stupefying effect, making the drinker feel pleasantly drowsy and sedated. It also, of course, created a dependency. The customer would crave that specific pub's beer, not for the taste, but for the narcotic high it provided. A weirdly specific piece of pub-related fraud involved tobacco. The thick clouds of smoke in the pub were a part of the atmosphere, but the tobacco itself was often fake. It was commonly adulterated with things like cabbage leaves that had been soaked in tobacco juice and then dried. So you were sitting in a room, drinking a salted, drugged beer, and breathing in the fumes of burning, nicotine-soaked cabbage. The academic question that fascinates historians of pub culture is the social function of this doctored beer. Was it purely a cynical exploitation of the working class, or did it, in a strange way, serve a need for a man whose life was one of relentless, painful labor? A beer that was also a mild narcotic might have been a welcome relief, a form of self-medication against the aches and pains of his existence. The publican might have been a poisoner, but he was also providing a cheap, accessible form of escapism. The line between victim and willing participant becomes blurry. You stare into your tankard of dark, salty, strangely potent beer. The noise of the pub seems to be fading into a pleasant, fuzzy hum. The aches in your body feel a little more distant. The warmth of the room and the effect of the drink are working their magic. You know you should stop, that you can't afford another pint. But you are so thirsty, and the escape is so welcome. You find yourself drifting back towards the bar, another penny already in your hand. The pub has you just as it was designed to. Let's say one day, wandering through the market, you see a splash of brilliant, almost unnatural green. It's a vendor selling pickles. Large glass jars are filled with gherkins, onions, and cauliflower florets, all swimming in a clear vinegar, but it's the color that catches your eye. The pickles are not the dull olive green of a naturally preserved vegetable. They are a vivid, electric green, a color that screams freshness and crispness from across the crowded market square. In a diet that is overwhelmingly brown, gray, and beige, the colors of bread, gravy, and boiled meat, a flash of vibrant green is incredibly appealing. It looks healthy. It looks like a taste of the countryside, a burst of summer in the middle of a grimy city. The vendor might even offer you a sample on a small wooden stick. You crunch into a slice of gherkin. It's incredibly sour from the vinegar, and it has a firm, satisfying dominated by the acidity. You might be tempted to buy a small jar. A few pickles would be a perfect accompaniment to a piece of bread and cheese, cutting through the fat and blandness with their sharp flavor and bright color. It feels like a small, sensible purchase, a way to add some zest and variety to your monotonous diet. But that beautiful green color is a deadly lie. It's not the color of a fresh cucumber, it's the color of poison. To achieve this eye-catching, fresh look, the pickle makers used a simple and horrifying process. They would boil the pickles in brass or copper pans. During the boiling process, the acetic acid in the vinegar would react with the copper of the pan, forming copper acetate. This highly toxic compound would be absorbed by the vegetables, staining them that brilliant, artificial green. Sometimes the process was even more direct. Instead of relying on the slow reaction with a copper pan, producers would simply add a dose of copper sulfate to the pickling jar. Copper sulfate, also known as bluestone, is a bright blue salt that was readily available as it was used in farming and industry. When added to the yellow-tinted vinegar in pickles, it created that same alluring, vibrant green. So when you crunch into that crisp green pickle, you are also crunching into a dose of a toxic copper salt. Consumed in small amounts, it might just give you a stomachache. But consumed regularly, it would lead to chronic copper poisoning, a nasty condition that causes gastrointestinal distress, liver and kidney damage, and eventually death. Those jars of beautiful green pickles on the markets all are essentially jars of poisoned vegetables, their lethality disguised as freshness. This wasn't just limited to pickles. The same technique was used for any preserved green vegetable. Bottled gooseberries, for instance, were often given the same copper treatment to make them look more appealing. It was an open secret in the food processing trade. A particularly bizarre and specific piece of evidence for this comes from one of the early food chemists, Frederick Occam. In his 1820 treatise on adulteration of food and culinary poisons, he described a test for consumers to perform themselves. He advised concerned housewives to stick an iron nail or a knife blade into their pickles and leave it for a while. If the pickles were contaminated with copper salts, the iron would displace the copper in a chemical reaction, and the nail would come out coated in a thin, reddish layer of metallic copper. It was a simple home chemistry experiment that could reveal a deadly secret. Imagine having to perform a science experiment on your lunch just to see if it would kill you. The historical debate here isn't about whether this happened, the evidence is overwhelming. The debate is about intent. Were the pickle producers knowingly poisoning their customers? The answer is complex. Most of them were probably not chemists and had no real understanding of the toxicology involved. They just knew that boiling things in copper pans made them look greener, and greener pickles sold better. The public demanded a product that looked fresh, and this was the easiest way to provide it. It was a vicious cycle of consumer demand and dangerous supply, fueled by scientific ignorance. They weren't necessarily malicious, just catastrophic ignorant and driven by profit. You look at the jar of glowing green pickles. Maybe you've heard the whispers, the rumors about them being copper red. Maybe you just have a gut feeling that something that green can't be natural. You decide against it. You turn away from the store, your appetite for a sharp, crunchy pickle suddenly gone. It's another small act of survival, another moment of navigating the treacherous landscape of the London food market. You've avoided one poison today, but as you walk away, you pass the candy store with its red leadened arsenic sweets, the baker's cart with its alum-laced bread, and the milkman with his chalky contaminated milk. In this city, poison is everywhere. It's just a matter of choosing which one you'll be eating today. Let's revisit the back alley butcher's stall, but this time you're not ambitious enough for a cut of meat. You're looking for something cheaper, quicker, and easier. Your eyes land on a string of sausages, hanging in long, pale loops from a hook. They are the ultimate convenience food, far cheaper than even the lowest grade mutton chop. A few sausages, fried up or boiled, could make a hearty meal when served with a piece of bread. The butcher sees you looking. Best bangers in London. You might say, using the slang term that would become popular later, full of prime meat they are. He winks. You know he's lying, but the price is incredibly tempting. For just a few pennies, you can get enough to feed yourself for a couple of days. Sausages are a staple of the working class diet precisely because they are so cheap. You buy a few links. They feel soft and slightly greasy to the touch. The butcher snips them from the string and wraps them in the same inky newspaper he uses for everything else. You take them home, your mind already on the simple, hot meal they represent. But what you hold in your hands is one of the greatest culinary mysteries of the 19th century, and nervously known as a bag o' mystery, because what went into it was, quite literally, anyone's guess. The fundamental principle of sausage making is that once you grind everything up and stuff it into a casing, it all looks the same. This made it the perfect vehicle for using up every last scrap of animal material that was too unappetizing to be sold in any other form. The base of your sausage was likely bread. Stale, leftover loaves from the baker, the same almond chopped bread we've already met, were a primary ingredient. They were soaked in water, mashed into a paste, and used as a cheap, heavy filler. This is why many cheap sausages had a soft, mushy texture when cooked. Then came the meat. This was the true mystery. It would include all the unsellable bits from the butcher's block gristle, tendons, and fatty scraps. It would include organ meats that were past their prime. It would almost certainly include meat from diseased animals. The slink meat that was too risky to sell as a solid cut could be safely hidden in a sausage. The grinding process conveniently destroyed any evidence of tumors or abscesses. And then there was the non-traditional meat. Horse meat was a very common and almost expected ingredient in cheap sausages, but the public's imagination ran wild with even less savory possibilities. The same fears that surrounded meat pies were magnified with sausages. Were there stray dogs and cats in there? Given the economics of the business, it's not impossible. The Victorians had a dark sense of humor about it. A popular joke of the time was to ask a sausage vendor, "Sir, is it true that you are more familiar with the bark of a dog than the low of an ox?" To mask the flavor or lack thereof of this motley collection of ingredients, and to hide the taste of meat that might be starting to turn, sausage makers were incredibly heavy-handed with the seasoning. Sage and black pepper were used in enormous quantities. Saltpeter was also a key ingredient, not just for its preservative qualities, but because it gave the sausage a more appealing, pinkish, meaty color, disguising the pallid gray of the bread and fat mixture. One of the more obscure and disgusting facts about the sausage trade involved the casings. The casing for a sausage is traditionally the cleaned intestine of an animal, usually a pig or a sheep, but cleaning intestines is a laborious, unpleasant job. In the unregulated chaos of the London food industry, it was often done poorly, if at all. The intestines might be sourced from diseased animals, and they were often processed in incredibly unsanitary condition, trapping bacteria inside and outside the sausage. Historians are still trying to unravel the complex supply chain of the sausage industry. It was a shadowy world of back-alley producers, meat brokers dealing in condemned carcasses, and vendors who were often one step ahead of the law. Was there a secret, citywide recipe for the London sausage, a kind of shared understanding of what cheap bangers should contain, or was every butcher a rogue chemist, improvising his own unique and horrifying recipe based on what scraps were available that day? The consensus is that there was no standard, only a shared principle: use what's cheap, hide it with spice, and sell it fast. You get back to your room and unwrap your purchase. The newspaper is spotted with grease. The sausages themselves look pale and unappetizing in the dim light. You might fry them over your small fire, and the room will fill with the smell of sizzling fat and sage. The smell is comforting, the smell of dinner. You will eat them, and they will fill your stomach. You will chew on the soft, bready, heavily spiced filling and try not to think too hard about what you are swallowing. The sausage is not just food, it's a symbol of your economic reality. It's a testament to the ingenuity of poverty, a product designed to look like a meal, feel like a meal, and be sold for a price that acknowledges you can't afford a real one. Your weekly budget is tight, and you've learned that buying in slightly larger quantities from a local grocer can be cheaper than buying single meals from street vendors, so you head to the small, dark shop on the corner. It's not a grand market, just a single room crammed from floor to ceiling with sacks, barrels, and boxes. The air is a dense mixture of smells: cheese, bacon, pickles, and the dusty scent of dried goods. The grocer, a man with ink-stained fingers and a permanently calculating expression, greets you from behind his counter. You're here for the basics: a few ounces of tea, a scoop of sugar, some flour, and maybe a small piece of cheese. You place your order, and he gets to work measuring out your goods. You watch him like a hawk, but you're no match for his professional cunning. The grocer's shop is a theater of deception, and the props are all designed to cheat you in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. This is the art of the short measure. First, he weighs your tea. He places a small brass weight on one side of his balance scales and scoops the tea leaves onto the other. The scales tip, and he quickly bags the tea, but you saw his thumb, just for a second, brush against the underside of the scale. Was it an accident, or did he just give the scale a little help to make it balance? Sooner you'll never know for sure, but you've probably just paid for a full ounce of tea and received only 7/8 of one. Next, the sugar. He uses a metal scoop to measure it out from a large sack. He dips the scoop in, levels it off, and dumps it into a paper cone. It looks fair, but what you don't know is that he has several scoops, and he picks one based on how savvy he thinks the customer is. For a cautious customer like you, he might use an honest scoop. For a child or someone in a hurry, he might use his special scoop, one with a dent in the bottom, skillfully hammered in to reduce its volume by 10 or 15%. It's a trick that's almost impossible to detect. Then he moves on to the flour. He measures it out, but as he is pouring it into your bag, he does it with a flourish, a quick flick of the wrist. A small, almost invisible puff of flour dusts the air and settles on the counter. He does this with every scoop. It's a tiny amount each time, but over the course of a day and hundreds of customers, these little puffs add up to a significant quantity of flour that he gets to keep and resell. One of the most specific and ingenious deceptions of the Victorian grocer was the weighing out paper. Before weighing sticky goods like butter or cheese, the grocer would place a piece of thick, heavy paper on the scale to prevent it from getting greasy. This seems reasonable. However, these papers were often pre-soaked in water or oil to make them heavier. A single sheet could weigh as much as half an ounce. So when he weighs out your half-pound of cheese, a significant portion of the weight you're paying for is actually just a wet piece of paper. It was such a common practice that it was a frequent subject of cartoons and articles in satirical magazines like Punch. The cheese itself is, of course, not safe from tampering. It was common for cheesemongers to press lower quality, younger cheese into molds to make it look like a more expensive, aged variety like Cheshire or Gloucester. They would also sometimes use dyes to mimic the rich, orange color of a good quality cheese. A popular and toxic dye for this purpose was annatto, which in high quantities could be harmful, but worse. Sometimes red lead was used for a deeper, more appealing color. The academic debate surrounding the grocer is about the nature of trust in a small community. This isn't an anonymous street vendor, this is your local shopkeeper. You see him every day. He might even know your name. Did this familiarity breed a kind of trust that made his deceptions even more effective, or did it create a complex relationship where the customer knew they were being slightly cheated, but tolerated it as long as the cheating didn't become too egregious? Was there an unwritten contract? I will continue to shop here, and in return, you will only cheat me a little bit. It's a fascinating question about the psychology of commerce in a pre-regulatory age. You pay the grocer your hard-earned pennies. He smiles, thanks you for your custom, and wishes you a good day. You walk out of the shop with your supplies for the week. You feel a sense of accomplishment, of having provided for yourself. But every single item in your bag is a lie. The tea is a fraction short. The sugar is a scoop shy. The flour is a few puffs light. And the cheese you're planning for dinner is sitting on a deceptively heavy piece of paper. You haven't just been sold goods, you've been expertly and systematically fleeced, one tiny invisible gram at a time. You've made it home with your haul from the grocer. You've managed to cook your questionable sausage or your suspiciously cheap cut of meat. Now for the final touch, the one that elevates a simple meal to something more seasoning. You reach for your pepper pot, a small tin or ceramic shaker that is one of your few kitchen possessions. A good dash of black pepper will add a much-needed kick of flavor, masking the blandness of the bread or the potential of taste of the meat. You sprinkle it liberally over your food. The dark dust settles over the meal, and the sharp, pungent aroma of pepper fills the air. It smells like a proper, well-seasoned dinner. Pepper was one of the most ancient and prized spices, a symbol of wealth for centuries. By your time, it's become more affordable, but it still carries an aura of culinary respectability. Using pepper feels like a sophisticated act. You take a bite. The flavor is there, a certain heat, a certain pungency, but it's also a bit dusty, a bit flat. There's an earthy, gritty quality to it that you've just come to accept as the normal taste of pepper. You continue your meal, oblivious to the fact that your pepper pot is a container for some of the most audacious and disgusting fraud in the entire food system. What you are shaking onto your food is almost certainly not pure ground peppercorn. It might, if you're lucky, contain some pepper, but is overwhelmingly composed of what was known in the trade as pepper dust, or P.D. As we discovered at the docks, this was literally the sweepings from the floors of the warehouses where peppercorns were stored. It was a delightful mix of pepper particles, dirt, sand, and anything else that happened to be on the floor. But the fraud didn't stop at simply using floor sweepings. To create a convincing fake pepper from scratch, counterfeiters would use a base of something cheap and readily available. Dried and ground pea flour was a common choice. So well-seed meal and crushed mustard husks, these would provide the bulk. Then they needed to add the pungency. For this, they would use cayenne pepper, which is much hotter and cheaper than black pepper. A tiny amount of cayenne could give a large batch of fake pepper the required kick. To get the right color and texture, they would add things like ground charcoal or even soot collected from chimneys. So, the pepper on your plate is a carefully engineered powder pea flour for bulk, cayenne for heat, and charcoal for color. It's a scientific achievement in the field of culinary deception. One of the most disgusting and weirdly specific adulterants for pepper was ground-up nutshells. The shells of coconuts or walnuts, which were otherwise a waste product, would be carbonized, burnt until blackened, then ground into a fine powder. This made an excellent cheap and gritty filler that looked vaguely like ground pepper. The thought of sprinkling your dinner with burnt coconut shells is profoundly unappetizing, but it was a documented reality. The ultimate destination for many of these fraudulent spice mixers was the institutions that bought in bulk and were least likely to complain: workhouses, prisons, and low-grade army suppliers. But plenty of it trickled down into the shops that served people like you. The academic debate here focuses on the sensory experience of the consumer. If a fraudulent substance successfully mimics the look, smell, and taste of the real thing, is it still a fraud in the consumer's mind? Your pepper is black, it smells pungent, and it adds a hot taste to your food. It performs all the functions of pepper. You have been conditioned to accept this dusty, gritty version as the real thing. The adulterant has become so common that it has replaced the original. Would you even recognize the complex, aromatic flavor of pure, unadulterated ground Malabar peppercorn if you tasted it? Probably not. You finish your meal, the last of the pepper swallowed. You successfully seasoned your food, adding a final layer of flavor. But that flavor was a lie. The heat on your tongue wasn't the noble fire of pipernerum, but the brutish heat of cayenne. The dark color wasn't from a prized spice, but from charcoal or chimney soot. And the grittins was, well, just grit. You put the pepper pot back on the shelf. It sits there, a humble, everyday object. But it's a perfect symbol of your culinary life. It's a container of lies, a carefully crafted illusion that you participate in every single day. You have to believe it's pepper, Just like you have to believe the bread is nourishing and the milk is pure. To believe otherwise, to confront the full, disgusting reality of what you eat every day, would be to lose the will to eat at all. Not eating is not an option. You lie down on your straw mattress at the end of another long day. The city outside is quieting down, the rumbling of carts and the shouting of vendors fading to a distant hum. But as the external world gets quieter, the internal world gets louder. You become aware of the landscape of your own body, and it is not a peaceful one. There is a constant, low-level protest happening inside you. It's a dull, persistent ache in your stomach, a feeling of being permanently bloated and uncomfortable. It's not a sharp, acute pain, but a chronic, grinding discomfort that has become the background noise of your life. You are so used to it that you barely even notice it anymore, unless you stop and pay attention, like now in the quiet of the night. Your digestive system is in a state of perpetual, low-grade warfare. Think of what you've put it through in just one day. You started with bread bulked out with alum, a chemical astringent that binds up your system and fights against the natural processes of digestion. You washed it down with tea made from recycled leaves and dyed filings, or coffee made from burnt roots. The milk you added was a watery concoction stabilized with chalk, horrifully pulped brains, introducing a host of bacteria into your gut. The sugar you had was laced with sand and dust from the warehouse floor, literally adding grit to your internal gears. The hot pie you ate for lunch was a greasy parcel of mystery meat, possibly from a diseased animal, its dubious origins masked by a fiery blast of pepper made from floor sweepings and charcoal. And it was all washed down with water drawn from a river that doubles as the city's main sewer, a daily infusion of the cholera and typhoid bacteria you are constantly fighting off. This isn't just a bad diet in the modern sense of too much fat or sugar. This is a diet of active antagonists. Almost every single thing you eat is not just lacking in nutrition, it is actively working against your body's ability to function. Your gut is not just trying to extract nutrients, it's trying to survive a chemical and biological assault. The result is the chronic ache, the cramps, the endless cycle of constipation from the alum-laced bread, followed by bouts of diarrhea from the bacterial-laden water and meat. You are tired all the time. Not just the physical tiredness from your hard labor, but a deep, cellular exhaustion. Your body is spending an enormous amount of energy simply trying to process the indigestible and fight off the poisonous. There are no spare resources for vitality or growth. You are in a state of managed decline. A fascinating, if grim, piece of medical history is the diagnosis of the time. If you went to a poor law doctor with these symptoms, you would likely be diagnosed with something vague like dyspepsia or gastric fever. The connection between your symptoms and the food you were eating was not always made, or it was seen as an unavoidable consequence of poverty. The specific culprits, the alum, the copper, the lead, were invisible villains. Your illness was seen as a personal failing, a weakness of your constitution rather than the inevitable result of a poisoned food system. Historians and historical epidemiologists still debate the long-term, cumulative effects of this diet. We know it caused acute illnesses like cholera and food poisoning. But what about the chronic exposure? Did the daily dose of lead from candy and cheesed ice contribute to the high levels of what was then considered insanity or lunacy? Did the constant battle in the gut lead to a higher incidence of stomach cancers and other diseases later in life? It's hard to prove definitively from the historical records, but the correlation is terrifyingly strong. Your body is not just a machine being run on bad fuel, it's a machine being slowly corroded from the inside out. You shift on your mattress trying to find a position that eases the dull ache in your abdomen. You close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come easily. The day's food is like a stone inside you, a heavy reminder of your place in the world. You are what you eat. An utterly indifferent city. The body's unending protest is the silent scream of the urban poor, a physical manifestation of a social and economic sickness. You are sick, the city is sick, and the food is the vector that connects the two. You finally drift off into a restless sleep, your body continuing its invisible, exhausting war through the night. Let's say the inevitable happens. The constant, low-level assault on your system finally breaks through your defenses. You wake up one morning not just with the usual aches, but with a burning fever, sharp stomach cramps, and a debilitating weakness. The body's protest has become a full-blown rebellion. You can't go to work. This is a disaster. A day without work is a day without pay, and a few days without pay means you could be out on the street. You need to get better, and you need to do it fast. You can't afford a proper doctor, so you turn to the only other option available to you, the burgeoning, wildly unregulated world of patent medicines. You drag yourself to a local chemist's shop or see a traveling salesman on a street corner, his cart adorned with colorful posters and dramatic testimonials. These medicines promise miracle cures for every ailment known to man. There are universal pills, soothing syrups, rejuvenating elixirs, and painkillers. The names are grand, the claims are extravagant, and the price is just about affordable. You read the label on the bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, a very real and incredibly popular remedy. It promises to calm fretful children and relieve adult pain and discomfort. Or perhaps you opt for a bottle of Godfrey's cordial, another bestseller. Desperate, you purchase a small bottle, scraping together your last few pennies. It feels like a wise investment in your health, your only hope of getting back on your feet. You get back to your room and take a dose of the thick, sweet syrup. The taste is cloying, but there's a sharp, alcoholic bite to it and a bitter undertone. Within half an hour, a strange and wonderful thing happens. The sharp cramps in your stomach begin to fade into a dull, distant ache. The anxiety and misery you were feeling are replaced by a warm, fuzzy sense of detachment and well-being. The medicine seems to be working. It's a miracle. But it's not a miracle. It's a drug. The cure is in fact another curse. You have just taken a hefty dose of opiates and alcohol. Mrs. Windsor, for instance, was a potent mixture of alcohol and morphine sulfate. Godfrey's cordial was a similar concoction of laudanum, opium tincture, treacle, and spices. You aren't being cured, you're being sedated. The entire patent medicine industry was built on this simple, cynical principle: sell the public legal, addictive narcotics disguised as medicine. The alcohol provided an immediate warming sensation and a mild buzz. The opium and morphine went to work on the central nervous system, killing the pain and inducing a state of detached euphoria. The customer felt better, so they believed the medicine was working. They kept taking it, and soon they were addicted. A particularly weird and lesser-known fact is that many of these medicines also contain some of the same toxic substances as the adulterated food. Some tonics contain strychnine, a poison, in small quantities to act as a stimulant. Others contained antimony or mercury, toxic heavy metals that were believed to purge the system. So your attempt to cure yourself from the effects of a poison diet involves you voluntarily drinking more poison, laced with powerful narcotics. The debate among medical historians is a poignant one. Were the creators of these patent medicines evil geniuses who knew they were creating legions of addicts, or were they simply operating within the accepted medical framework of their time, where opiates were seen as a legitimate, almost magical cure? Or the answer is probably a bit of both. There were certainly cynical hucksters, but there were also many who genuinely believed in their product, convinced that sedating the patient and masking their symptoms was the same as curing them. The line between medicine and drug dealing was almost non-existent. You take another dose of the syrup later in the day. The temporary relief is so profound, so welcome, that you crave it. The medicine is not just fighting your physical symptoms, it's fighting the misery and hopelessness of your life. For a few hours you are floating in a warm, opium-induced haze, and the grimy, painful world recedes. You might recover from your initial illness in a few days, but you are left with a new problem. You now associate feeling better with the little brown bottle of syrup. When the daily aches and pains of your life return, the temptation to take another dose is immense. You have escaped one rapid bout of sickness only to walk straight into another, the soft, alluring, and ultimately destructive trap of addiction. Your search for a cure has only deepened your sickness, adding a new, invisible poison to the long list of those you already consume every day. For years, you and everyone you know have been living in this state of quiet suffering, accepting the grit in your bread and the ache in your stomach as a normal part of life. You complain, You tell dark jokes about the contents of pies, but you feel powerless. It's just the way things are. Who is going to listen to you? But then, you start to hear whispers. Rumors ripple through the pubs and the markets. There's a man, a doctor, who is doing something strange, something revolutionary. His name is Arthur Hill Hassel, and he has a secret weapon, a microscope. You might hear about him from a snippet of conversation, or see his name in a newspaper that someone has left behind. The stories say that he is taking food from the shops of London, bread, tea, coffee, pepper, and looking at it through this magical magnifying glass. And under the lens, all the secrets are being revealed. Imagine for a moment you could look through that microscope yourself. You'd see the sample of bread you bought this morning. You wouldn't just see flour, you'd see the distinct, crystalline shapes of alum. You'd see the lumpy, irregular particles of chalk. The lie would be made visible. Then you'd look at the tea. You'd see the structure of the real tea leaf, but mixed in with it, you would see other, foreign leaves. You might see the unmistakable glint of iron filings, or the dark, ominous specks of graphite. You would see the proof of the fraud with your own eyes. Under the microscope, the coffee would reveal its secrets too. The coffee grounds would be there, but so would the telltale cellular structure of chicory root, the woody texture of ground acorns, and maybe even the horrificously identifiable cells of roasted animal liver. The pepper would show you the round starch granules of peas and the jagged blackness of charcoal. Dr. Hassel wasn't just looking, he was drawing. He meticulously drew everything he saw, creating a visual library of food fraud. These drawings were then published in a series of groundbreaking articles in the medical journal The Lancet, beginning in 1851. For the first time, the public could see the adulteration. It wasn't just a rumor or a suspicion anymore, it was a scientific fact, laid bare in black and white. The project, which became known as the Lancet Analytical Sanitary Commission, was a sensation. Hassel and his team tested hundreds of samples from shops all over London. They named names. They published the addresses of the grocers and bakers who were selling fraudulent goods. It was a terrifying prospect for the dishonest shopkeepers who were suddenly at risk of being publicly shamed. A specific and fascinating detail of Hassel's work was his development of what he called a chronology of discovery. He found that as soon as he published his findings about one type of adulterant, the fraudsters would switch to another. For example, when he exposed the use of red lead in cayenne pepper, producers quickly switched to using a less toxic but still fraudulent red dye made from ground fir wood. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game, with science and fraud trying to outwit each other. Hassel was not just a scientist, he was a detective, chasing the criminals through the microscopic world of their own creations. The academic debate around Hassel's work is about his true motivation and impact. Was he a pure scientist, driven by a thirst for knowledge, or was he a social crusader, using science as a tool for political change? The evidence strongly suggests he was the latter. He was outraged by what he saw, not just as a scientific curiosity, but as a profound social injustice. He saw the poor being systematically poisoned, and he used his position and his skills to fight back. He wasn't just documenting the problem, he was trying to solve it. For you, lying in your room feeling the familiar ache, the news of Hassel's work is a tiny spark of hope in a dark world. It's a validation of your suffering. The problems you face every day, the sickness, the exhaustion, are not your fault. They are not a weakness in your constitution. They have a name, a shape, a chemical formula. There is a reason for your pain, and now, someone is proving it. The microscope becomes a symbol of a new kind of power. Not the power of wealth or status, but the power of truth, of objective fact. It's a power that can cut through the lies of the baker and the deceptions of the grocer. The battle against food fraud has a new champion, and he is armed not with a sword, but with a lens. For the first time, it feels like the tide might, just might, be starting to turn. The tiny, fragile sense of optimism begins to bloom in the polluted air of London. Change, it seems, is no longer impossible. The whispers about drive. Hassel's work in the Lancet grow louder. His shocking illustrations on detailed reports are no longer just the talk of doctors and scientists. They are being picked up by newspapers and discussed in pamphlets. The evidence is so overwhelming, so visually compelling, that it can no longer be ignored. The public, especially the literate middle class who read these papers, is becoming outraged. The pressure begins to build on the one institution that has the power to do something about it, Parliament. You start to hear talk of a new law, a law that would make it illegal to adulterate food. It sounds like a dream, a revolution. Imagine a world where you could buy a loaf of bread and know that it was just bread. A world where tea was just tea, and pepper was just pepper. It seems too good to be true. After years of campaigning by Hassel and other reformers, and after numerous parliamentary committees where shocked politicians heard testimony about the horrors of the food industry, it finally happens. In 1860, the first ever Adulteration of Food and Drink Act is passed. It's a landmark piece of legislation, the very first of its kind in Britain. The news spreads through the city. The government has finally stepped in. The poisoners and the fraudsters are going to be stopped. There's a sense of victory in the air. It feels like a turning point, a moment when the powerless have finally been protected by the powerful. You might allow yourself to feed a sense of hope. Maybe now things will be different. Maybe your children will grow up in a world where they aren't slowly poisoned by their daily meals. But as the weeks and months pass after the new law is enacted, you notice something strange. Nothing changes. The bread is still heavy and chalky. The tea is still weak and metallic. The grocer's thumb is still on the scale. The grand new law, the great victory for the people, seems to have had no effect whatsoever on your daily life. The 1860 Act was, in reality, a classic example of a law with no teeth. It was a well-intentioned failure. Firstly, the law was not compulsory. It gave local authorities the option to appoint a public analyst to inspect food, but it didn't force them to. Most towns and boroughs, not wanting to spend the money, simply didn't appoint one. In the first 12 years of the Act, only 7 analysts were appointed in all of England. Secondly, the penalties were laughably weak. The maximum fine for a first offence was a mere £5. For a successful grocer or baker, this was just a small cost of doing business. It was not a serious deterrent. They could make that much back in a single day of selling fraudulent goods. And thirdly, the law was poorly worded. It made it illegal to sell food with an additive that was injurious to health. This created a huge legal loophole. A baker could argue that while he did add alum to his bread, he didn't add enough to be truly injurious. His lawyer could claim that sand in sugar or chicory in coffee wasn't injurious at all, just a harmless way of lowering the price for the poor. The burden of proof was on the prosecutor to show not just that the food was adulterated, but that it was actively dangerous, which was often difficult and expensive to do. A quirky and specific example of the law's failure was the pepper defense. When a grocer was prosecuted for selling pepper adulterated with pea flour and mustard husks, his defense was that he had bought it from a wholesale supplier in good faith, believing it to be pure. The law made it difficult to prosecute anyone but the final seller, allowing the large-scale manufacturers and importers at the top of the fraudulent food chain to escape scot-free. The academic debate here focuses on the political motivations behind the law's weakness. Was it a genuine but flawed first attempt at regulation, or was it a deliberate political maneuver, designed to look like it was addressing the problem while actually doing very little to harm the powerful business retailers? Many historians lean toward the latter. The government was built on a philosophy of laissez-faire, a belief that the government should not interfere in the free market. The 1860 Act was a reluctant concession to public pressure, written in such a way as to cause the minimum possible disruption to commerce. You stand in the market, looking at the same old stalls selling the same old lies. The hope you felt has evaporated, replaced by a familiar cynicism. The law was just words on paper. It was a gesture, a performance for the benefit of the middle-class newspaper readers. It did nothing for you. The powerful had protected the powerful, and you were still at the mercy of the poisoners. The fight is not over, but the first round has been a bitter disappointment. It would take another, stronger law in 1872, and then an even more effective one in 1875, to finally begin to clean up the nation's food supply. But that is years away. For now you are stuck in the same grim reality. You have learned a hard lesson in politics or law is only as strong as the will to enforce it. And for the poor of London, that will was still tragically absent. Years pass. The world changes, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, and then with gathering speed. You are older now. The relentless grind of factory work and the long-term effects of a toxic diet have taken their toll. Your body is a map of your life, etched with aches and pains. But, as you look around, you see the faint glimmers of a different future. The memory of the great stink and the tireless work of men like Drive, Hassel and Doctor. Snow did, eventually, bear fruit. You see gangs of men, navvies, digging massive trenches through the city. They are building the Great Interceptor Sewers, a monumental feat of engineering designed by Joseph Bozeletich. They are finally taking the sewage out of the river and carrying it far away to be discharged. The water, while still not clean, is no longer a thick, brown soup. The weak-footed alteration law of 1860 is replaced by stronger, more effective legislation. Public analysts are appointed, not as an option, but as a requirement. The fines for adulteration are increased. And for repeat offenders, the law allows for their names to be published in the newspapers, a public shaming that is more terrifying than any fine. You walk into a grocer's shop. The scales are different now. They are more robust, more official-looking, perhaps with a stamp on them from a government inspector. The grocer seems more cautious. The old, casual deceptions are becoming too risky. You buy a loaf of bread, and it tastes different. It's not as brilliantly white, perhaps, but it tastes more like actual wheat. It doesn't sit like a stone in your stomach. The tea you brew has a cleaner, more delicate flavor. The pepper is more aromatic, less gritty. You are, for the first time in your life, beginning to taste food as it is supposed to be. The relentless daily assault on your body is starting to ease. The constant, low-level protest in your gut is a little quieter now. This grim culinary era, the one you lived through, is slowly coming to an end. It leaves behind a powerful and lasting legacy. The horrors of the 19th century diet directly led to the birth of the modern food safety movement. The scientific work of Hassel paved the way for the fields of food chemistry and public health analysis. The epidemiological work of John Snow created the foundations for how we track and fight diseases today. Every food label you see, every food label you see, every sell-by date, every government health inspection has its roots in the suffering you and millions like you endured. A strange and specific legacy of this time can be found in our language and culture. The phrase "full of baloney" comes from the idea of sausages being filled with cheap nonsense. The very word junk food, while a 20th century invention, perfectly captures the spirit of the 19th century diet food that is not just empty of nutrition, but full of rubbish. The dart, humor and urban legends, like Sweeney Todd, became a permanent part of the cultural memory. A reminder of a time when you really didn't want to know what was in your pie. The academic debate about this era's legacy continues. To what extent was the improvement driven by government regulation versus consumer awareness and the rise of branded goods as companies began to build national brands? They had a reputation to protect. A Heinz or a Cadbury couldn't afford a scandal about adulteration, so they began to pride themselves on their purity and consistency. Was it capitalism in the end that cleaned up the mess that early, unregulated capitalism had created? It's a complex question with no simple answer. You sit in your small room, looking out the window. The London air is still smoky, the city is still loud and crowded, but something fundamental has shifted. The relationship between the city and its people, between the seller and the buyer, is being rewritten. You are no longer entirely defenseless. There are laws, inspectors, and scientists on your side now. Your life has been a long, hard journey through a culinary nightmare. You have eaten chalk, alum, sand, and lead. You have drunk water from a sewer and beer laced with salt. You have survived a daily diet of poison and lies. You are a survivor of a forgotten war, a war fought in kitchens and markets, in bakeries and breweries, and your legacy, the legacy of your scarred and resilient body, is the foundation of the safe, clean food that future generations will, for the most part, take completely for granted. They will never know the taste of grit in their sugar or the fear of what lies beneath a pie crust. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. And now just let the story fade. The sounds of 19th century London, the clatter of carts, the cries of the vendors, they all begin to melt away, dissolving into the soft, steady hum of the fan in your own room. The weight of that history, the grit and the grime, can be set down now. You can let it go. You don't have to carry it anymore. Imagine the character you've been, the Londoner who survived it all. See them, finally, at peace. Perhaps they are sitting by a small, clean window, holding a cup of real, fragrant tea. The chronic ache in their stomach has finally, after a lifetime, subsided. There is a quietness in their body that matches the quiet of their room. They are safe. They are nourished. And you can rest too. Feel the weight of your own body sinking into your mattress. A comfortable, trusting weight. The air you breathe is clean. The water you drink is safe. You are surrounded by a quiet, invisible shield of safety and care. A shield that was forged in the fires of that difficult past. Let your own thoughts grow slow and heavy, like thick, warm honey. There are no more struggles to witness tonight. The journey is over. The lesson is learned. Incoming tide of sleep. Let it wash over you, pulling you softly out into a calm, deep, and peaceful dream. The end of the article. Good night.